After I graduated from college, Adam and I moved to Quincy, Massachusetts, just outside of Boston, for me to pursue a graduate degree in a field that ultimately I ended up walking away from. Even though I was working 40 hours a week and in grad school, when I think about that time in my life, what I think about is church. Very shortly after landing in Quincy, Adam and I found ourselves becoming part of a house church. Evangelism side note here, all it really took was someone inviting us to a cookout. Their deep care for one another and for reaching out to others was palpable and compelling. We were a group of a dozen or so, mostly 20-somethings, committed to really doing life together. We wrestled with the teachings of Jesus, trying to figure out what it meant to live as a person of faith in the world. We had dinner together every Sunday night. We read and discussed scripture. We broke bread. We sang together loudly in each other's living rooms. We cooked a meal once a month in a local shelter. We helped pay people's bills when they needed it. Some days we showed up to wash each other's dishes, because none of us had dishwashers in our tiny apartments. Sometimes we sat and folded laundry together just for the company. That community filled my life. It saturated my days. It broke open for me the question of what makes church real. Worshiping, living alongside these faithful people stripped away my notions of what church looks like, sounds like, even smells like. I struggled with these questions a lot because this was not the image of church that I was raised with. These people held me in my really intense wrestling. They held me in a period of spiritual brokenness. They held me with gentleness and sometimes with a fierce, tough love that would not let me stay as I was. This church wrapped itself around me and became a source of strength and healing. It was beautiful and life-giving. And then it too cracked. Unless a grain of wheat falls into the earth and dies, it remains just a single grain. But if it dies, it bears much fruit. I didn't feel ready for that house church to fall into the earth and die. People's life circumstances changed. A recession came, jobs were lost, babies were born, people moved away. The community that had formed a shell around me split open. The shape of life that I thought I understood no longer held me. Now, standing here today, I can tell you that the love and care and healing I experienced there were seeds planted deep in my spirit. You know now that I found the Episcopal Church, that I made it through seminary, that I ended up here as your associate rector. But, of course, I didn't know any of that then. Then it was painful. Then I didn't know if I'd ever have deep connections like that in a faith community again. We can similarly look at these stories of Jesus before his death and say, yes, he will be crucified, but there will be resurrection. Yes, he will go down into the earth, but that will bring forth new life. We can hear the double meaning when Jesus says, when I am lifted up from the earth. We see both the cross and the glorious ascension. But the disciples are not there. They are in the pain. The disciples have been in deep community with Jesus and one another, have traveled and argued and eaten and lived life together. And they are watching as this whole thing cracks open. Before the section of the gospel that we heard this morning, Jesus had raised Lazarus from the dead. The crowd that witnessed that event went out and apparently told tons of people because suddenly many people had heard about this miracle and were flocking to Jesus. The authorities, who were already appalled at his following, who were already plotting to find a way to trap him, say, the whole world has gone out after him. And now they really want to have Jesus killed. This is the context when these Greek speakers come up to Philip wanting to see Jesus. I wonder what he was hoping Jesus' response would be. When Philip went to talk it over with Andrew, and when they decided to go together to approach Jesus about the situation, I wonder if they were hoping that Jesus would put some of this craziness to rest, or would reveal some glorious plan of revolution. The text doesn't preserve their reaction for us, but I imagine it was some mix of dread and grief and maybe even anger when Jesus tells them, the time has come for me to submit to this. My body will be broken open. Your lives will crack apart. My glory will be on a cross. I don't think it's the life they thought they were signing up for, at least not initially. Interestingly, I don't read judgment about that here. This is not a text that gives us substitutionary atonement or divine punishment. I think sometimes we hear indictment where there is none. We mentally add in shall lose, as in those who love their life will lose it, as if pain is divine punishment for enjoying your life too much. But the text simply states that they lose it. The sense is clinging too tightly to your own will, your ego, those things you think you want for your life, is self-destructive. It's the reality of being human. We have to practice letting go, even when it feels like some part of us is dying. After all, this is the same Jesus who just 2 chapters earlier told his disciples that he came that we might have life and have it more abundantly. It's tough for us to wrap our minds around this abundant life held right alongside loss and death. But it is what Jesus is pointing to, I think. How could the disciples have imagined that Jesus' death, his body being laid into the earth, would become the source of so much life, of such abundant fruit? They could not have seen the generations that would be held in the love of the leader they knew so intimately. They could not have known about us some 2,000 years later, drawing nourishment and hope from their story. When the life we have known is being cracked open, when what has sustained us is falling apart, often all we can see is the dirt and the dying. There is so much breaking apart right now. In some of it, we can see beauty sprouting from what had been dry and neglected. In some of it, we can see destructive shells being broken open and new life pouring in. And some of it only seems fractured right now. If we can't see the fruit just yet, that's okay. Our job in these times is to allow the seed to fall. Gradually, we learn not to cling so tightly to what was that we destroy the life that will come. Jesus, there will be life from death, fruitfulness from the smallest seeds. But first, we must fall into the earth, be buried with him, and crack open.